Before we begin, a note. This episode contains detailed descriptions of murder, psychological manipulation, financial abuse, and the deaths of animals. Please take care of yourself. There is a particular kind of person who names their 8 English setter dogs after the legends of Brazilian popular music. Nando Reis, Cazuza, Tim Maia, Elis Regina, Vinicius de Moraes, Rita Lee, Caetano Veloso, Gilberto Gil. That person was Jefferson Machado da Costa, and understanding him, really understanding who he was, is the only honest place to start this story. Jeff, as his friends called him, was 44 years old in January of 2023. He had grown up in Araranguá, a modest coastal city in the southern state of Santa Catarina, thousands of kilometers from the dazzling, chaotic machinery of Rio de Janeiro. He was the kind of man who loved music and dogs and stories, who looked at a television set and did not just see entertainment, but possibility. A stage, a mirror, a world he could belong to. He had done the hard thing. He had picked up and moved. He had left his mother, Maria das Dores, a woman in her mid-70s whose voice when she speaks of her son sounds like someone describing sunlight, and he had gone to Rio because that is where Brazilian television lives. That is where the castings happen, where the cameras are, where the contracts get signed. He was not a stranger to the industry. He had acted on a nationally broadcast television series, the epic historical drama Race, aired on the Record Network. He had credits. He had experience. He had a face made for the screen and a presence that people noticed. He also had 8 enormous, beautiful, soulful dogs. The setter is a breed that requires devotion. They are energetic and loyal and deeply attached to their people. Jeff didn't just keep them, he adored them. He named them after the giants of MPB, Brazilian popular music, because that was the kind of man he was, someone who found the sacred in the artistic, who wanted the creatures he cared for to carry the names of people who had meant something to the world. His colleagues knew about the dogs. His family talked about the dogs. The dogs were inseparable from the idea of Jeff. And as you will come to understand, the dogs would be the ones to unravel everything. My name is Harrison Cross, and this is The Blackout Tapes. Jeff had a dream, and that dream had a specific shape, a contract with TV Globo. In Brazil, Globo is not just a television network. It is the television network, the institution that has shaped Brazilian culture for decades, the place where actors become household names, where careers are made permanent. Getting a role on Globo is the equivalent of landing a lead in a Hollywood studio production. It is the difference between a working actor and a star. Into Jeff's life walked a man named Bruno de Souza Rodrigues. Bruno, who went by the nickname Bruno La Rubia in social and artistic circles, had a history with Globo. He had worked there in casting and production and had been formally dismissed in 2018. But he carried the knowledge, the language, the jargon, the insider ease of someone who had been behind those walls. He knew how to talk the talk, and he knew how to make someone believe. Bruno told Jeff he could make it happen. For a fee, of course. There were processes, paperwork, intermediaries. The entertainment industry, Bruno explained, worked through relationships and facilitations. There were photography sessions to be paid for, casting costs, insertions. The money would flow toward a guaranteed contract. Jeff paid. And then he paid more. And then he paid again. Police estimates put the total he transferred to Bruno at between 30,000 and 35,000 Brazilian reais, the equivalent of $6,000 to $7,000, a sum that, for a working actor living in Rio de Janeiro, represents enormous personal sacrifice. His mother would later testify that the demands kept coming in fragments, small amounts here, slightly larger ones there, always framed as the final step before the breakthrough. When a person has a dream, Maria das Dores said during the criminal proceedings, her voice nearly breaking. It seems like they go blind. She was not criticizing her son. She was describing something that victimology researchers have documented extensively: the phenomenon of motivated belief, the way that a person who has invested enormous emotional and financial capital in a promise cannot psychologically afford to recognize it as a lie. To accept the lie would mean accepting the loss of everything. The money, yes, but also the future, the version of yourself who gets the role, who arrives, who is right to have come all the way from Araranguá to try. Bruno knew this. He understood it with the precision of a predator who has spent years studying where the soft spots are. To understand what Bruno did to Jeff, it helps to know that Jeff was not the first. After Bruno's arrest, the Rio de Janeiro State Prosecutor's Office would file a second independent criminal case against him, this one involving a former romantic partner, a man who had been in a relationship with Bruno for 15 years. After their breakup, Bruno had maintained the appearance of friendship, keeping himself close, keeping access open. Starting in 2021, that former partner began receiving threatening messages from unknown phone numbers. The senders claimed to have intimate photographs of him and threatened to release them publicly unless he paid. The victim was a teacher. The exposure would have destroyed his career. Terrified, he turned to Bruno for guidance. Bruno listened. Bruno sympathized. Bruno advised him to pay. The extortion escalated over months. The victim sold personal property and drained his savings, suffering losses that prosecutors would calculate at more than 600,000 Brazilian reais, nearly 130,000 US dollars. All of it, from beginning to end, orchestrated by the man he had trusted enough to call a friend. The forensic thread connecting that case to Jeff's murder was simple and irrefutable. Two of the anonymous numbers used to terrorize the former partner were the exact same phone numbers Bruno used in the weeks after Jeff's death to impersonate him online. The same device, the same method, a different victim. Bruno was not a man who had made a terrible choice under pressure. He was a systematic predator who moved through the lives of people who trusted him and dismantled them, financially, emotionally, physically, for his own benefit. Sometime in December of 2022, Bruno rented a small house on Rua Itueira in Campo Grande, a neighborhood in the western zone of Rio de Janeiro, roughly 20 kilometers from Jeff's apartment. He had the perimeter walls of the backyard raised. That detail only makes sense in retrospect. At the time, to anyone who might have noticed, it was a home improvement. Nothing unusual. But the walls were not being raised for privacy in the ordinary sense. They were being raised so that what was going to happen in that backyard could not be seen from the street. Around the same time, a man named Jeander Vinicius da Silva Braga entered the picture. Jeander was 29 years old, a laborer who took on various types of work: bricklaying, baking, informal services. He met Jeff through a dating application in early January of 2023 and began visiting Jeff's apartment. Investigators believe his arrival in Jeff's life was not accidental. He appears to have been introduced as a final element in a plan that Bruno had already been assembling for weeks. Residents near Rua Itueira would later report seeing a man matching Jeff's description at the property during January. He had apparently been brought there at some point under some pretext, a location scout perhaps, or the promise of a filming space. A man who believed he was on the verge of a television career would have had no reason to be suspicious. The killing happened on or around January 23rd, 2023. Jeff was at his own apartment, in his own home. Bruno and Jeander arrived. At some point that evening, Jeff was given a drink that had been laced with a sedative. He would not have known. He trusted these people. At least he trusted Bruno, the man who had his career in his hands, the man who was going to make the call. When the drug took effect, when Jeff's body slackened and his ability to resist or cry out diminished, he was strangled with a telephone cord. The medical examiner's findings confirmed death by mechanical asphyxia through cervical constriction. Strangulation of this kind requires sustained force and sustained presence. Someone had to hold the cord and keep holding it while a man who had left Santa Catarina with dreams of being on television stopped breathing on his own floor. Afterward, they folded his body. His wrists were bound, his limbs forced into a fetal position so that he would fit inside the chest. The chest was a piece of furniture from Jeff's own apartment. A large decorative wooden trunk, the kind you might keep blankets in, or costumes, or any of the artifacts a performer accumulates over a life in the arts. They loaded the chest into Jeff's own car. They drove 20 kilometers west to the house with the tall new walls. In the backyard, Janda dug. The hole was 2 meters deep. The chest was lowered in. Then they poured concrete. For the next 4 months, Jeff's phone kept sending messages. His WhatsApp was active. His social media profiles were maintained. And every few days, messages appeared. To friends, to colleagues, and most cruelly, to Maria das Dores in Santa Catarina, saying that Jeff was fine, that he was busy, that he was in São Paulo working on something exciting. There was an explanation for why the messages were only text and never audio or video calls. Jeff's phone, Bruno wrote, had fallen into a toilet. The microphone and camera were broken. Only the keyboard worked. Maria das Dores was 76 years old. She had spoken to her son every single day. She knew the rhythm of his sentences, the particular way he strung words together, the things he would and would not say. She read those messages and something in her stomach went cold. The grammar was wrong. The vocabulary was strange. The cadences were off. Her son was a man who had trained his voice and his expression for the stage. He was precise about language. These messages were careless in a way Jeff never was. She couldn't prove it. But she knew. Her other son, Diego, had the same feeling. He gave the phone an ultimatum. Send a voice note, or he was calling the police. Minutes later, he received a call, not from Jeff's voice, but from an unfamiliar man named Bruno, who introduced himself and explained that Jeff had spontaneously left for São Paulo and gone quiet. Diego got on a plane. When he and Bruno visited Jeff's apartment together, Diego walked through the rooms and catalogued what was wrong. The suitcases were still there. The toothbrush was still there. The towels were damp, recently used by someone. The laptop was gone. The televisions were gone. The valuable, portable things had been removed. And Bruno, standing in the apartment of the man he had murdered, kept using the wrong tense. He said things like, he liked and he was. Not he likes, not he is. Diego noticed. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. He went to the police the next day. On January 27, 2023, 4 days after the murder, people in the western zone of Rio began calling animal rescue organizations. English setters were appearing in the streets, wandering disoriented, clearly hungry, clearly traumatized. First one, then another, then others. The NGO Os Indefesos responded. Veterinarians and volunteers collected the animals and brought them in for care. Standard procedure, scan for microchips. Jeff, devoted and careful, had years earlier arranged for subcutaneous identification chips to be implanted under every dog's skin. Every single one of those chips, when scanned, returned the same name, Jefferson Machado da Costa. Think about what that information meant to the rescue team. Think about what you would conclude if you learned that a man's 8 dogs, all registered to his name, were wandering the streets of the city he lived in while someone was texting his mother to say he was doing great in São Paulo. The organization contacted the family. The confirmation destroyed whatever remained of their doubt. A man who adored his dogs, who had named them after the musicians he revered, who had brought them all the way to Rio de Janeiro with him, that man had not abandoned them voluntarily. He could not have. He would not have. On February 4th, the family formally filed a missing persons report with the Delegacia de Descoberta de Paradeiros, the unit specializing in missing persons cases. The investigators began pulling on the thread. Of the 8 dogs, 7 were eventually located. Nando Reis, Cazuza, Tim Maya, Elise Regina, Vinicius de Moraes, Rita Lee, all found alive, all placed in adoption programs. Diego, Jeff's brother, took in Nando Reis himself. Caetano Veloso was found in Campo Grande, the same neighborhood where the body was buried. Severely malnourished, his organs already failing. He died within 24 hours of being rescued. Another dog was struck by a car and killed. Gilberto Gil was never found. Bruno and Giander would later face charges of animal cruelty resulting in death. Police investigators began triangulating phone data. The science of cell tower triangulation works like this. Every time your phone transmits data, sends a text, loads a page, connects to a network, it pings the nearest cell tower, called a radio base station. Those pings are logged. They create a record of where a device was at every moment it was active. Bruno had been sending messages from Jeff's phone assuring the family that Jeff was in São Paulo, but the cell towers told a different story. The timestamps matched exactly, and the towers that processed those messages were not in São Paulo. They were in the western zone of Rio de Janeiro, in the same geographic cluster that covered Bruno's own device. The messages Jeff's family received as proof of life were sent from the same part of the city where a chest containing Jeff's body was buried under concrete. At the same time, police forensics examined the house on Rua Itueira. Ground-penetrating radar indicated an anomaly beneath the concrete in the backyard. On May 22, 2023, a team arrived to excavate. 9 specialists in total: forensic experts, civil defense workers, operators of pneumatic jackhammers. They broke through the concrete layer and dug down 2 meters. They found the chest. Inside was what remained of Jefferson Machado da Costa. The body had been in a sealed anaerobic environment for 4 months. The tissue had undergone a process called saponification, the conversion of body fat into a waxy substance that sometimes occurs in sealed, humid conditions. Visual identification was impossible. Forensic examiners at the Medical Legal Institute recovered partial fingerprints from the remaining skin and matched them against biometric records. It was Jeff. When arrest warrants were issued in early June of 2023, Giander was taken quickly. He didn't run far. When investigators questioned him, he eventually broke. He admitted he had helped dig the hole. He admitted he had helped move the body. He claimed he had been brought in to excavate what he thought was a water cistern and only understood what was really happening when Bruno ordered him to lower the chest into it. He admitted Bruno had offered him money, and that what he ultimately received was 300 reais, $60. In his own words to the judge, "I was wrong to help bury the body, but I did not kill him. Let each person pay for what they did." He denied strangling Jeff. Prosecutors dispute this. The contradictions in his early testimony, combined with his physical presence at the scene and the sequence of events he himself described, form the basis of a co-authorship charge. Bruno ran. He disappeared into the city. Investigators, understanding the risk that he would leave Brazil entirely, placed his name in Interpol's system. But before that became necessary, Rio de Janeiro cybercrime specialists picked up an unusual pattern. Someone was connecting to residential Wi-Fi networks in the Vidigal area, a hillside community in the southern zone of the city. Over 5 days, the network activity was monitored and narrowed down to a single building. On June 15, 2023, Bruno de Souza Rodrigues was arrested in Morro do Vidigal. He has not spoken publicly since. The case moved through the courts over the following 2 years. Witnesses were called. Evidence was presented. Maria das Dores testified and asked that Bruno be kept out of her line of sight for the duration, a request the judge granted. She sat in the courtroom anyway and told the court who her son was. She called Bruno extremely Machiavellian. She said she wanted the judge to understand the nature of the person before her. On August 19, 2025, Judge Alessandra da Rocha Lima Roides issued her ruling. Both men would stand trial before a popular jury. In Brazil, intentional homicide is constitutionally reserved for judgment by ordinary citizens, not by a single magistrate, but by a panel of 12 people drawn from the community. The judge's decision to send the case to a jury meant that the evidence, in her assessment, was not only sufficient but compelling. The charges Bruno faces include homicide with multiple aggravating circumstances. Among them, the financial motive, the use of a sedative to incapacitate the victim, and the deliberate concealment of the crime through months of digital fraud. He also faces charges connected to the use of Jeff's bank accounts and credit cards after the murder, and animal cruelty resulting in death. Gender faces homicide and concealment charges as a co-author. The jury trial had not yet taken place as of the time this episode was recorded. Both men remain in preventive custody. Maria das Dores Machado is in her late 70s. She speaks of her son in the present tense when she forgets herself, and in the past tense when she remembers. She had spoken to him every single day until those strange, cold, grammatically wrong messages started arriving. She had known immediately that something was wrong, because she knew how her son wrote, how he thought, what words he would never use. A mother who had listened to her child long enough to recognize him by rhythm alone. Jeff was not a naive man. He was not uneducated, not inexperienced, not unaware of how the entertainment industry operated. He was a 44-year-old professional with credits, with contacts, with years of experience in the field. What Bruno exploited was not ignorance, it was desire, the legitimate, human, completely understandable desire to have the thing you have worked your whole life toward finally be within reach. The dogs named after Elis Regina and Caetano Veloso and Gilberto Gil carry Jeff's story encoded under their skin. The microchip that read his name was the thing that broke the case open, the love Jeff had for those animals, the devotion that led him to chip every one of them and name them after the music he revered, reached back across his death and refused to let the men who killed him simply disappear. 5 of the dogs found new homes. Caetano Veloso died in Campo Grande, a few streets from where his owner was buried. Gilberto Gil was never found. Jeff's brother Diego adopted Nando Reis. Jeff's name is still attached to the animals who are still alive, still walking around in the city where he came to pursue a dream.